sweet Ruto,"
the Zora King lamented as he peered off to the island with the lone tree in the middle of a shrunken Lake Hylia. The blue fire worked perfectly on King Zora, instantly warming him and nursing him back to health. He and Link left together from Zora's domain, for Link knew the frozen-over oasis was no place for a Zora, and if the king remained, he would surely freeze again. So he escorted the king across all of Hyrule to Lake Hylia with him and Epona, so he could survive in the warm waters while Link helped Ruto break the curse from the water temple.
"You will get her back,"
the king said, almost pleading.
"You've rescued her before."
Link knew that this time, Ruto would not be coming back with him. Keen on not breaking the king's heart, Link conjured up something to say. "Your daughter was one of the bravest girls I met when I was a kid." Link meant what he said. No one would be as unfazed as she had been inside Lord Jabu Jabu if they were in the belly of a great fish. And now she's a grown woman, gone to try and break the frozen curse on Zora's domain. She doesn't need rescuing, she needs help. Link finished as he looked towards the island the king was staring at. That must have been where the water temple lay.
"It was something unnatural,"
the king stated.
"When Zora's domain froze. It was not gradual like the weather. It wasn't even overnight like a cold spell. No, it was instant."
"Instant," Link repeated. The evil in the temples had only been acting up recently. So everything was normal before that?
"Well, if you don't count the turnover of the Hyrulean throne to Ganondorf,"
the king began.
"During the Gerudo Rebellion, we Zora sat neutral. Our only pledge to the Kingdom of Hyrule was our fresh water supply, and that remained the same after the dust of the rebellion settled."
Link stood in silence, digesting this information.
"The last thing I remember seeing before being frozen was Ruto."
"Hey King, Link wanted to address the elephant in the room. It had not come up between them up to this point. "I know this may be too little too late, but I'm sorry for taking the Zora Sapphire without marrying Ruto. I know that is the Zora tradition."
"We may have sat neutral during the rebellion, but rest assured, Link, there would have been no royal wedding during such a time of turmoil," the king said. "But tell me, where did you disappear to for all those years?"
Link couldn't tell whether there was a hint of accusation in the king's voice. "I guess you could say I got caught up in it." King Zora nodded his head.
"We all did, Link. We all did."
With the air cleared between Link and his would-be father-in-law, Link set out to the water temple, removing the pelt he had made in the Zora River Valley, and swimming across an abbreviated distance due to the low water level of the once vast lake. Clearly, this was due to the lack of water flowing down Zora River from Zora's domain. The water was cool on Link's body as he really worked to tread the water with all of his equipment, but soon enough, he reached the clayey shore of the island. The expansive round island had bundles of wild grass swaying in the breeze in its center, and in the middle of it was a signature hexagonal slab, boasting an engraving of 6 drops of water pointed radially outward from the center. The lone tree sat adjacent to it, jutting up out of the moist soil and leaning outward over the southern shore. Suddenly, Link decided this might mean something, and he walked over there to investigate. Sure enough, there was a dark gray stone wall retaining the land on the shore from a deep drop-off into the water. Jumping into the water on that side, Link could now see this structure was a facade, adorned with artistically intriguing, curvy, almost spiral-patterned carvings, similar to the Zoradic writing in Ruto's note. The facade spanned about 15 feet wide by 30 feet tall, the rest of that height extending downward, under the water. At the foot of this gray stone facade, a doorway with a little gray stone floor was visible underneath the water, clearly a Zora-friendly entrance to the temple. Gasping for a large breath to hold, Link allowed his heavy equipment to bring him all the way down to that walkway, and maneuvered his way into the doorway to the water temple. When he was in, he couldn't see much in the darkened water, but swam up as fast as he could to find the surface. His head emerged with a gasp from his lungs. He was in a tight water-filled passage in front of a ledge of a floor, which lay before a great cave-like chamber filled with blue light. Link pulled himself up, and looked at the sight before him. In the center of this chamber, a building within the cave stood, emerging from yet another body of water flooding the cavern. It was a 3-story square tower, constructed in a pagoda style from that dark gray stone, adorned with the same curvy engravings, and even bronze embossment panels of similar art style. The 3 levels each consisted of a thin slab, overhanging equally around the main walls of the tower, boasting ornamental curls on the corners, visually tying them to the other motifs of the edifice. A pyramidal blue-tiled roof with curved hips topped the tower off, each corner curled like those of the slabs. Each of these corners also supported a serpent-like gargoyle above, with an ornamental lantern hanging below, from which the blue light was emanating. The level of the water matched the elevation of the top tier of the 3-tiered pagoda. Link carefully swam in the deep water to the floor of this top tier, and pulled himself up onto the edge of the slab. "Look!" Navi alerted, just as he stood up, drenched in the temple's water. Link looked around, a bit startled, but then noticed what Navi must have seen. A spider-like insect the size of a large dog was standing on the water, using its 4 scrawny green arachnid legs to float calmly on the water's surface. It drifted around the corner of the tower, close to the tier on which Link stood. "That is a Tektite," Navi shouted. "It will attack you, but it's hard to beat on the water. Lure it onto land." It slowly spun around as it drifted, revealing a single red beady eye on its blue torso. Once its bulbous pupil faced Link, it pounced from the water's surface, getting some massive air as its trajectory was perfectly set on Link. In one fell swoop, Link unsheathed the Master Sword and sliced the creature, down and to the left diagonally. The Tektite was so light, its body easily crumbled to pieces. In a bit of disgust, Link stepped over the insect parts and turned the corner of the tower, only to find 2 more. With great patience, Link lured them both to the dry slab, where he effortlessly sliced them into pieces as well. He turned the corner again to the backside of the pagoda, and very quickly, yet another leapt from the water and onto the floor of the overhang. All in that same second, Link followed suit, and prepared to lunge at it with his sword. "Kaya!" A cry of terror it let out, but Link recognized this cry of terror from inside of a great fish. Ruto? Link could now clearly see this wasn't a Tektite, but a Zora. In the moment, he didn't see that, because he did not expect to find her, or any Zora, alive. "Link?" Ruto responded as she stood up from her defensive crouch. She had matured into a woman now, her Zora fins fully grown, and her figure filled out. She wore azure earrings on those ribbed ears, and her hammerhead hadn't changed a bit. It was clear her violet eyes were filled with a mixture of emotions as she looked Link up and down. She finally embraced him, pressing on him and holding him tight. Link hugged back, for he was indeed happy to see her again. She pulled away, her white hand still on Link's shoulders. Then one of them came stroking down his cheek. Link thought his estranged fiancé was about to lean in for a kiss, but he was shocked by a slap to the face. "You're a terrible man to have kept me waiting these 7 long years." Link looked down at his feet with shame, realizing she was right. Ruto was releasing 7 years of pain Link inadvertently caused. Link could only imagine the feeling of a young Zora princess, whose savior effectively asked her hand in marriage after rescuing her from danger, even if her savior didn't know it at the time. Seeing her like this brought all that repressed guilt to the surface, because it wasn't inadvertent. At the time, Link chose not to explain himself. All that mattered was the acquired artifact. Link remembered wanting to help people, the people of Hyrule. To do this, he thought he needed that stone at all costs. But at what cost? In his quest to help the many, he heard one, especially since it turned out that those dreaded stones did more to harm than to help. Should he really have led Ruto on like that? "You're right, Ruto. But now is not the time to talk about love," Ruto cut him off. "I'm sure you've seen it. Zora's domain, totally frozen." Link was still a little caught up in the whirlwind of emotions that had just transpired, but he nodded his head. "A young man named Sheik saved me from under the ice. Maybe I should have given him my sapphire." Link was completely taken aback by that comment on many different levels, even if it was sarcastic. He gave her a puzzled look. "I'm kidding," she reassured. "You are the man I have chosen to be my husband, and right now the woman who is going to be your wife needs your help." Ruto put her hands back up on Link, cusping them on the back of his neck. "The other Zora, my father, I need to help them all. I managed to rescue your father with blue fire, but Nehru's flame." Ruto excitedly stepped back, not allowing Link to finish his warning regarding the others. You saved my father with Nehru's flame. She looked Link up and down again, but this time she wore a smile. Nehru is the token goddess of this temple. That is why I am here. If you were able to save my father with Nehru's flame, then I must be able to save the other Zora by breaking the curse on her incarnate deity, the Water Spirit. Water Spirit? Link repeated. He didn't want to dismay her with what she had told him. Ruto hooked him around the shoulder, bringing her face close to his, and pointed to the back of the blue-lit cave. The reflection of the water danced around a statue up on a high ledge. It was a serpent-like creature, matching the gargoyles atop the tower. It held a fierce gaze, flashing a pair of fangs, yet it was not menacing, but peaceful. This water spirit guards the water temple, she explained. It is said this elusive spirit hides beyond that statue, but it is also said that before one is able to get there, one must face themselves in the Chamber of Reflection. Chamber of Reflection, Link repeated once more. Ruto tapped on the wall beside them. The tower must have held the chamber she was speaking of. The entrance is around the front. If you're going to help me, you're going to need to face yourself like I just did. What do you mean, face yourself? Link asked her as she stepped over to the edge of the overhang, appearing to prepare for a dive. The Chamber of Reflection is a place of reflection, Ruto replied. You know, facing your demons, being at complete peace with yourself. That's deep, Link said pensively. He knew it was going to be tough for him in particular. I'll go ahead, then you meet up with me. Before Link could say anything, the Zora princess dove directly down into the water, gracefully wriggling her body under the surface. She turned back upwards, flapping her webbed feet to propel herself, then like a dolphin, blasted up out of the water to the ledge where the serpent statue was situated. With a turn back at Link, she smiled at him, before disappearing beyond the ledge. Link smiled back, trying not to show any of the rising sorrow inside him for his friend and mistaken fiancé, who had been called to the water temple, surely the Sage of Water. Hey Link, Navi spoke. I was the one who told you to brush off the whole engagement. I'm sorry. Link was in good standing with Ruto now, and just wanted the whole thing behind him. He nodded at Navi, proceeding to say, Let's go find that door. The door was not simply around the front. After some investigating, Navi spotted it down on the first level, underwater. Had Ruto forgotten that Link could not breathe underwater? Whatever the case, Link took the deepest of breaths, not knowing how long he would need to hold it. He sunk to the bottom and turned the ornate door through the stiff resistance of the water. It brought him inside a small room with a blue-themed tile mosaic on every wall. Centered on the back wall, a single large tile stood out. It was an arched stone panel with a pattern of emanating rays. Once he closed the door behind him, he peered around through the clear water. The room was completely filled with water, with nothing else to do. Was this the Chamber of Reflection? Suddenly, the arched stone panel slid upward, creating an opening in the wall. It was a door. Immediately, the volume of water filling the small room went flowing out of the new hole, releasing the pressure into an empty adjacent room. Link was swept by this current and burst out into the next room, spilling onto the floor like the rest of the water. His clothes and equipment once again soaking, he gasped for air and took in the surroundings of this room. It was much larger, about the size of the central building. This must have been the Chamber of Reflection. However, the size seemed to grow as a fog began surrounding him, appearing to cover a vast horizon. The ceiling seemed to disappear as well, as the fog gave the sensation of clouds high up in the sky. The water that had spilled all over the floor was now hiding the floor, with a super reflective sheen, like the surface of a mirror. Link did not notice it before, but an island was situated before him. It was a simple sand bar with a lone dead tree rooted in the center. He walked up to it, noticing two pagoda-style huts, one beyond the island and one immediately behind him, from where he came. Completely at peace, Link thought to himself, closing his eyes trying to achieve it. But how could he? He was still tortured by guilt, haunted by the outcome of his actions from 7 years prior. It was old news, but it still nagged at Link's conscience. All those people in Castletown, Impa, the King, Zelda. The thought of her name specifically was like a twist of a knife in an untended wound. In his quest to aid her, he killed her, in a quest that shouldn't have ever been his. In this regard, Link was Ganondorf's best asset. He opened his eyes, looking down at the water. Peering back at him was his own reflection, but the color was off. The silvery surface of the water may have been creating an illusion that Link was gray. Or was it? A crimson glow radiated from either side of his nose. The glowing red eyes injected a cold fear throughout Link's body. His eyes darted up, and the reflection followed. Standing before Link was himself, or at least a dark version of himself. Terrified, Link pulled the Master Sword from its sheath. The shadowy figure simultaneously pulled a black Master Sword from his own sheath. Slowly waving it around, Link saw that the figure copied his movement exactly. Link took the Hylian shield on his right arm. The figure did the same. Link wiggled his fingers across the hilt. Its shadowy fingers did the same. Link?" said Navi carefully. "Conquer yourself." Link flinched, swinging his sword arm, but the blade was met with the clang of a blackened version of the Hylian shield. There was a shockwave Link was not really expecting when the dark sword clashed his own shield. This went on for some time, Link smashing equipment with his dark self. After such relentless grinding, Link grew very tired. Why bother, he thought. Surely he was going to fail again. He was not worthy of brandishing the legendary blade. Link let his arms down a bit. It was enough for Dark Link to get a good swipe at him. Staggering, Link felt the area on his chin where he got nicked, and felt the stickiness of some dripping blood. That was the first time a sword had really injured him. Up to this point, any time he found himself in some swordplay, he had excelled brilliantly. Had his luck run out? He looked down at the Master Sword. He could have sworn there was a blue corona glowing about the edges of the blade. Suddenly, he recalled something Rauru had said. Only one worthy of possessing a hero spirit can pull it from the pedestal. If this sword did have some mystical power, it allowed him to pull it from the pedestal in the Temple of Time, because of his spirit. What if that was why he had been so good with a sword without so much as a single lesson? After that pause, he regathered himself. In turn, his opponent had paused as well. Link went back at it, dancing with his shadow across the shallow mirror-like water. This time, his determination took over. He had been so good with the sword before. Why couldn't he continue that now? The Great Deku Tree had said something about destiny to Link before he expired. Sheik had mentioned a legend of a hero who would unite the sages of each tribe, which was exactly what he was doing. His own dreams at one point were telling him what would come to pass. Finally, Link fully recognized the significance of these connections. Perhaps the goddesses had this all planned out for the orphaned boy, who was raised by a guardian who could sense it. It doesn't matter why you are chosen, Navi had said at one of his most discouraging times. If he was a chosen one, he had to live up to it, because it was his destiny. Pressing onto his dark shadow, he gave him a flurry of attacking, the Master Sword carving a path so effortlessly through the moist air of the foggy room. So what if pulling the Master Sword allowed Ganondorf to enter the Sacred Realm? Maybe that was the only way he could fulfill his destiny. And the 7 years? Rauru did say that was the only way. Suddenly, Dark Link began to stray from exactly copying Link. He slowly threw in more and more of his own parries and jabs, as if he became desperate. For once, Link thought of all the good he was able to do for people throughout Hyrule. He saved the Kokiri Forest from being swallowed up by the forest monsters. He saved the Gorons, twice, heralded as a hero both times. He assisted the young Zora princess when she got swallowed up by her guardian, and now Link was going to help her again. Finally, Link had Dark Link off balance, and went in for the finishing blow. In a tone just below Link's own voice, the shadow let out an anguished scream as he fell into the shallow water. The darkness of the lifeless figure faded into nothingness. Link had successfully vanquished his foe, even if he got a little beat up in the process. The fog began to lift, and the clouds began to clear. The doors on the two pagoda structures faded into just plain doors on the walls of the room. The island was no longer there, and the silvery water had become plain water. Link was a little amazed by the illusion, but he thought he knew what had just come to pass. He continued through the door across the room. It opened up to a small room, just like the one he used to enter the Chamber of Reflection. Then it closed behind him. It turned out this room held a chest in the center. Feeling very invited to open it, Link flipped up the lid. and inside found an interesting device. It was a contraption of steel, consisting of an arrowhead blade and a metal handle, wrapped in a coiled chain. The handle was painted with a shiny finish of cobalt blue, and it boasted some sort of trigger. Curious, Link pressed it, and startled himself as it fired the arrowhead blade at the wall with great velocity, causing a loud clank to ensue. It was followed by the rattling of the unraveling chain falling to the floor, which was connected to the blade. When he took his finger off the trigger, the chain swiftly recoiled back into its original position. "It's some sort of hook shot," said Navi. "I bet you could use it to get up to that ledge." "Where the water spirit is," Link finished. He knew how he would do it, too. Eagerly, he opened the door, which would lead him to the side of the cavern the ledge was on. An immense wave of rushing water came flooding in. Once the room was filled, Link held his breath and swiftly swam to the surface, where he aimed the hook at the mouth of the serpent statue. Sure enough, the blade caught onto one of the fangs, and Link was pulled from the water up the wall, to the high ledge that Ruto jumped up to so effortlessly. Link had to get to her. He pulled himself up in front of the serpentine gargoyle, then looked ahead beyond it, to a hallway with a slight incline upward. It led to a cubical chamber, aglow with the wild dancing of blue wave reflections on the tiled walls and ceiling. The waves of the water reflected from a square pool in the center, surrounded by a walkway around the rim, which was encroached by thickets of large thorns around the edge of the entire room. Link examined the pool in the center. The waves of the water must have been so active because of recent activity. When he came to this conclusion, a large thing violently emerged from the water. It was a worm-like monster, translucent and deep blue in color. The pest had the front of its rope-like body wrapped around something. Someone. It was Ruto. The thing thrashed about, shaking her like a sack of seeds. Still with the hookshot in his hand, Link shot it at the base of its tubular body, but the hook and chain splashed through it like they were water. Link despairingly watched, because that's all he could do. Finally, Ruto was flung, tossed aside like an article of dirty clothing. She flew through the air from about 15 feet up, across the room to the very corner, and right onto a cluster of those giant thorns. Link rushed over to her and rolled her off the thicket. She took on a number of puncture wounds from that, but what mattered was her lack of breath, and paleness in her smooth white skin. She may have already been dead. Knowing what he had to do, Link turned to face the creature. Its flailing head began to transform, shifting the water-like material of its skin to form a serpent's head, one that matched the statue guarding this place. "Is this?" Link asked Navi. It roared, flashing a pair of watery fangs. Then from the back of its transparent throat, a pinkish-reddish blob pushed its way out and towards Link. He dodged the projectile, watching it land on the floor with a jiggly bounce. A slimy substance splattered off the jelly-like mass. "Morpha!" Navi shouted out. "A nasty amoebic parasite that has complete control over the water around it." The giant aquatic amoeba now was flexing its body, wiggling on the floor as the red core vibrated violently. Whatever it was doing, Link put a stop to it with the Master Sword, an easy slash to a small little runt. Before Link could get more in, however, it made a remarkable jump, over Link's head and back into the pool. The thing swam in quick circles in the center, creating a vortex that swirled counterclockwise. Wherever the serpent went, it was coming back now, emerging from the vortex. Link waited for Morpha to come at him again so he could keep attacking it, but it stayed back, keeping to the throat of the serpent, which was making futile attempts at grabbing him. He and his adversary had arrived at a deadlock. "Pull it out so you can attack it," Navi suggested. Pull it, Link thought. He took the hook shot and tried firing it again, this time aiming for the red blob. It worked this time. The hook dug itself into Morpha's fleshy skin, and the recoil of the chain yanked it from the watery creature. Link hacked away, but it was still alive and angry. It leapt even more spryly and whipped up its vortex even more violently. This time, the whole pool was flowing horizontally along the sides of the walls. That was how intense the whirlpool was, and being the harbinger for the emergence of the serpent, it was appropriate, for the serpent was longer, thicker, and swifter than ever. Caught off guard by this, Link got swept up, and was thrashed about, just like Ruto. Helpless, all Link could do was take the painful shaking. and braced for the sting of the huge thorns. Link's actions after that may have been motivated by anger, but they were best described as fierce. He ripped Morpha from its host with some emphasis, and in a flurry of sword swipes, the amoeba burst open, oozing a viscous juice into a puddle around it like a broken egg. The water had suddenly turned still. No waves, no serpent, just a smooth, still surface. Meanwhile, Rudo's body sat limp and lifeless, drained of all of its brilliant white color. Link's emotions bubbled up, and tears streamed from his eyes. Whatever was between him and Rudo could no longer be. Fiancé or not, he wept for her, hugging her body like she was still there. Overcome with this grief, he passed out beside her, of course, only to open his eyes and see her own staring back at him. I would have expected no less from the man I chose to be my husband. Link looked around the ethereal white of the Chamber of Sages. A good distance behind him stood Rauru, Saria, and Darunia. Rudo turned his head back to her with a gentle stroke to the cheek. I grant my eternal love to you, Link. Link cared for her. He always had. He wanted to say it back, but it just wasn't true. Well, Rudo saved him. That's what I want to say, but I don't think I can offer that. Because you now must guard the water temple as the Sage of Water, Link assumed. Because your love belongs to another, she said, as if she were correcting a grammatical error. This caught Link way off guard. He wasn't sure that was true. Rudo was in love with him, and even though he did not feel the same way, there would always be a place for her in his heart, but to suggest he was in love with someone else. Ha, she blurted, probably seeing it on his face. You can't hide anything from me. Based on what she said, Link wondered if she figured out that he never meant to marry her. He would have agreed to the marriage if that's what it meant to obtain the stone, but ultimately, not for Rudo, but for Princess Zelda, Rudo said, taking the name right from his train of thought. She's alive, I can sense it. Link was not so much apprehensive as he was confused. The thought of her being alive filled Link with the greatest of feelings. But Sheik said, he told me she died in his arms. He also said the Zora underneath the ice cannot be saved, but when the ice eventually melts, they're going to be alright. I can sense that too, Rudo said matter-of-factly. If you see him, give him my thoughts, okay? The white light began to fade, and before Link could get anything more from her, he was gone from the Chamber of Sages, coming to on the hexagonal pedestal in the middle of the small island, atop the water temple. The slab was wet. It had been pouring rain for some time, and despite its water level still being low, Lake Hylia all of a sudden looked healthier, more vibrant. Look at that, Link, a familiar soft voice said from behind. Together, you and Princess Rudo broke the curse. As the water slowly rises, so will the evil from the lake, and the ice in Zora's domain will begin to slowly melt. Link turned around, facing Sheik in the heavy rain. Rudo said to pass her regards along. Rudo wanted to thank me? Sheik replied. Well, we have to return peace to Hyrule for her sake too, don't we? Link turned his back, facing King Zora, who was still sitting on the eastern shore. Sheik came over to his side. Link could only imagine the loneliness he would endure with his subjects frozen beneath a layer of ice. Rudo thinks once the ice melts, the Zora are going to be okay, Link mentioned, looking over to Sheik for his reaction. The Zora are not known to endure those conditions, he said rationally, but I pray that I am wrong. Was this the only thing Sheik could be wrong about? Link had to ask. She also said she could sense that Princess Zelda is still alive. Link looked to his side as he finished the loaded remark, but Sheik was not there. He was nowhere to be seen as Link looked around the small island, but something blue caught his eye, falling downward from the top of the tree. The blue flash splashed into the lake before Link could get a better look, and the waves from the point of entry were all that were left. Whether Link liked it or not, that question would have to wait. As for the other one, he looked back over to the Zora King, and thought to himself, me too.